All right, we might make a start, I think. Thank you for braving the wet weather and coming out and enjoying and joining us in the room, in Japanese room, and also those people online for making time to attend. The April session of the Retrofit Forum. I'll start just by acknowledging country. If I can get the screen to work. There we go. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands never ceded, the Wairarong, Bunurong, and the Wurundjeri people, the Kulin Nation. As we said, lands never ceded. We appreciate the custodianship of the lands and pay respect to the elders, past, present, and importantly for the university, emerging. We've got a great session today, one that I've been looking forward to, which is looking at residential retrofit, potentially a slightly smaller scale, but also with some insights into some larger scale stuff as well. So we've got Antony, DiMase, and Felicia, Richardson, both of who have been really strong supporters of the Retrofit Lab since it started. So that's great. Antony is an architect with a lot of experience in retrofit renovations, and has had a lot of insights into how that translates into other work in industry as well. And Felicia represents Enviroflex and the 3E Alliance. So we'll hear a lot more about that, but really looks at the supply side where a lot of the knowledge for retrofit sits. So it'll be a really interesting conversation on the way through that. We might start with you, Antony. I'll just swipe over your presentation. There we go. Antony, you might want to just reintroduce yourself in a bit more detail.
More detail. Well, yeah, look, thanks for inviting me. I really enjoy coming to the Retrofit Lab each month. Would have liked to have heard some other speakers other than myself, but I'm really, really excited about presenting what we do. And I've called it Making Old New Again. And starting with this slide, which is, essentially one of our projects midway through. And the reason why I wanted to start with this is that when you actually start a project on site, a retrofit project on site, you realise there's not a lot to the building that you're actually working on. Essentially some sticks and bricks and floor, and you're trying to make that work, that building, into something special. I think the relevance of buildings, existing buildings, is the way in which they sit in the environment, in the neighbourhood, and it's all too easy just to demolish some of these buildings and not try and retain them. So, there's not a lot to them, but they have significance in the way that they relate to the community, to the local population, and to the context in which they sit. So I'm an architect, but I'm primarily interested in the built environment and the way that it interacts with people and the natural environment. So my full-time job is running DiMase Architects, but I also do a podcast called Light, Cities and Architecture. Is it possible to share that screen? And I'm also a director of Architects Declare, which my role with the other directors is essentially to support the signatories of the declaration that was made several years ago. I think it's fair to say that retrofitting is becoming more and more popular. It's growing in popularity, and I've called it an evolution or a revolution where design practices, tradies and enthusiasts are doing a lot of the work. And for me, it's about reimagining space as being a better version of itself. It's not about grand gestures, but it's about small acts of kindness that show we care about the built environment. And I think it really shows our commitment to the past, present and future. So in a sense, we acknowledge the past, we're designing for the present, but we've also got a mind for the future. I think one of the real benefits of retrofitting is that it's an easy case to make to the general public. I think a lot of people accept the idea that the reuse of existing buildings is a good idea. Coming to this forum, I've often sort of left thinking, well, does that project really constitute a retrofit project? And I think because retrofit is closely associated to sustainability, I think it would be a really good idea to sort of define what a retrofit project is. So for the purposes of the exercise, I've decided to do it myself with a view that it should be something that gets discussed, because I think there is a risk that it could be greenwashed by a variety of people. So from my point of view, the idea is that we prioritise maintenance as the first and best option. We intervene only as needed. So I don't think you put a percentage on how much constitutes a retrofit project. So, 50% means that it's a retrofit project. No, you intervene as needed, but you don't intervene more than what you need to. I think an important aspect is to respect and acknowledge the original spirit of the place. So if we're designing, a suburban house, I think it's really important to acknowledge that that was its heritage. That's the thing that you are actually working on. I don't think we have any role in changing the way in which that building looks or feels. Or I think that it's really important in a retrofit project that you actually honour the building that it is. And I think it goes to the things that we decide that we're going to retrofit and those things that we decide that we're going to demolish. Companion pieces. I really believe that architecture that works in this space is about the interplay between the existing and the new. It's not about the old versus new. We see a lot of that in architecture. And I sort of really want to call out sort of, a hero of mine in Carlo Scarpa in that image to the left, where I think he really knows how to interplay between old and new really, really successfully. It's past, present and future thinking. I think sustainability outcomes has to be a really important part of any retrofit project. So, you could go to Kew Junction and see, a chemist warehouse that's, taken over 3 terrace houses. I don't think that constitutes a retrofit project per se, even though they are taking over an existing building. So sustainability has to be at the heart of any retrofit project. And finally, inspiring change and advocating for a different approach. So I think part of our role as architects is to actually inspire change of thinking. So the projects that we do shouldn't be sort of dour and, boring. They should actually really lift what's possible in this space and not see, retrofit as a second-rate sort of project by any means. How does this go? Why is this working? So these are just some images of Melbourne. I think, if I was to describe Melbourne, it's kind of reimagined itself so many times. We have a real knockdown rebuild sort of mentality. Anyone who's watched Lost Melbourne or looked at books of the sort of buildings that have been demolished, it's quite scary, and it's continuing, quite frankly. Some really good buildings are being demolished, and frankly, what they're being replaced with isn't really great quality architecture. So buildings like the one in the middle on the bottom, that's a Windsor Smith factory near to where I live. That's been sitting abandoned now for 10, 15 years. It's quite a good building, but I'm almost certain that will be demolished at some point and apartments put up. And those apartments, frankly, I suspect will be of not very good quality. So with all the demolition that's happened over the last 200 years, the only thing that we seem to be doing is retaining the facade or, bits of buildings that are significant in someone's point of view, but we're not really hanging on to the buildings that have some value to the community. We're just kind of hanging on to bits of them, like the image in the centre at the top there. So I'll just talk through some projects that we're doing. This is actually my home. So we're retrofitting a house that's 130 square metres. It's a very small little house, and that's my son who is doing the work. And so when you're doing retrofit work, it's pretty messy. That's you're pulling up floors. There's a lot of dirt involved. There's a lot of waste, and it's really hard work. So the idea behind this project is that we're not extending the footprint. It had a sort of fairly simple renovation when we bought it. And we're just keeping it like for like. We're renovating it room by room. So when we finish one room, we go on to the next and then the next. And we're on to the last internal room, and then we're moving on to the outside. So my son has basically stopped school at year 10 and has sort of been working in the construction industry. So he and I have been working together on this project, and it's been a lot of fun. He is big into TikTok, and I don't know how to make this work, but he will put all of these videos onto TikTok, and it's a lot of fun. So he's kind of someone who's really working in this space in a really interesting way and sort of showing what's possible. He primarily works on his own, and he brings in subcontractors as he needs to. He's not a builder. He's basically a handy person who's doing the work as need be. So he's doing things like putting in splashbacks, putting in little concrete paths for people and all sorts of things. So he's sort of built up quite a good little business out of doing this sort of work. So I'll just flick through other projects that we've been involved with. So, and I'll sort of go fairly quickly because time is of the essence. But I think I'll sort of give you an idea of the work that we're involved with. So this is a warehouse in West Melbourne, where we basically retrofitted this to a passive house standard. It was a building that had been renovated and turned into a 1990s kind of spec development. And we basically had to pull the whole building apart and get it to a much higher sustainable level. The client was really committed to producing a low energy outcome. And it was one of the first times that I've been involved in a passive house and really understanding the way in which that works. So it achieves air tightness. We've got really good quality windows and doors. There's no thermal bridging. So the reason that steel beam is shown, there's actually a plate between it and the boundary wall. And we're using, material like Gutex on the internal walls to provide that insulation. This is what, the outcome is like. And, it's a really beautiful home that basically, essentially the way it was is the way it is. We've just basically made it a better version of itself. A lot of my architecture doesn't try and do a lot of detailed sort of stuff. It really tries to keep the spaces as clean and as simple as possible, with a view that someone at a future date can make that house or make those spaces into what they want. That's a really important part of the work that we do, or the work that I do, is that we don't sort of labor on the spaces. We try and create spaces that are actually really easy to occupy and for the clients to do with as they choose. So again, we're just going to flick through a whole range of projects. This is a project in George Street, Fitzroy, an existing house, a new roof, a new companion building at the back, a little carport at the rear, solar panels, batteries. The client in particular was really invested in all of these things, sort of wanted all of those things, so we delivered them. But a lot of it was really about the repair of a beautiful old Edwardian building and turning it into a space that suited a family, met their expectations of what a family needs in that sort of location. All the while we're doing all of the basic work that I learned here some 30 odd years ago, insulation, good quality windows, good quality doors, low maintenance. So this house, you would expect will survive, hopefully 50 to 100 years. We try and get the basics right. That's fundamental to the work we do. Another project in St Kilda that was just recently finished. And it's, going back to my 7 characteristics of a retrofit house. This is about, creating a companion building to an existing Spanish mission inspired house in near the Botanical Gardens in St Kilda. So we're trying not to compete with the existing building. We're trying to basically be its best friend, to be a companion building to the existing building. So we're not trying to shout out to the community that here we are. We're not trying to play old against new. We're actually trying to be quite recessive in the way that we're doing things. Internally, we sort of uncover spaces that are actually already exist. That central space actually existed. So I can't claim credit for it, But by doing all the work in and around that space, it kind of comes to life again. That space on the left-hand side is where the old and the new meet each other. And there's this kind of transition space that's really nice, really kind of delineates old and new, but it's not a hard line between old and new. It's a very easy line between old and new. It's a very comfortable space to be in. So, I know that I've been asked to talk about residential work, but we have done quite a bit of non-residential work. In some ways, the retrofit portfolio exists more outside of the residential work. So this was an old 1960s, 1970s warehouse in Brunswick, which we converted into a book publishing office called Scribe Publications. So the whole interior was fitted out in the way that you can see there. Don't know if, that's what the front of it looks like. So it's a very nondescript building. We didn't change anything in relation to it in terms of, we actually kept in with, the language that was already there. We put a new entrance in with a timber door, but it was all about the interior and the way in which the interior worked. We've done a fair bit in the education work, which interests me quite a lot. So this plan is what's called an LTC, which is the light timber framing, light timber construction, which is a very common type of school building that was built in the 60s in Victoria. And essentially our job was to convert 3 classrooms into 2. So to give the school greater flexibility in the way that they could operate. So these are the sorts of buildings which will often get demolished. And so that's the interior. You can see on the bottom right, the type of building. I think it would be reasonably familiar to most of you what that sort of building looks like. The reason why we were able to renovate it, I think, is because the school themselves actually took great care of this building. So the argument against demolition just wasn't there. It was a well-maintained building. And if you look at the slide on the top left, those bag areas, they're actually original. So, there was no need to change them. They actually worked completely fine. So, by virtue of the fact that these buildings were actually well-maintained, made the argument against demolition that much harder, and certainly not something that we would advocate. So, our work was essentially to create spaces that were flexible, which is what education facilities want, and, obviously bring it to life in some fashion. Probably one of the, most challenging jobs we've had was Camberwell High School, and there's, so we do work for the VSBA, and VSBA sort of see me as a kind of a bit of a maintenance person. And so we acquired a job to renovate 63 windows on a building that was designed by Percy Everett, and it was built in 1941. I sort of felt like I was out of my depth to some extent. There was, major sort of issues all over the place with the windows. You can see that central slide with the wall that's got bits of newspaper and bits of chicken wire that's holding it up. When you uncover what's in some of these buildings, it's kind of hard to know what to do. The weight system on the windows was something that no one had ever seen before. It's actually shared between 2 windows. So the weight was actually servicing both windows on both sides, which was quite unusual. A lot of the sills were rotted. And it was my job to basically refurbish and renovate this particular project. So this is the outcome. So this is the western facade. So essentially what I was able to argue is that not all the windows needed to be replaced. And that was quite a hard argument to have with both the client who had the money to replace the windows, but I was basically saying we only replace the ones that need to be replaced. The other ones can be repaired and made good. because my argument was that the timber that was being used in those timber windows were actually really good quality, and there was no essential gain in replacing those windows. So there was a lot of discussion about that, and fortunately I was able to sort of hold firm, and it sort of worked out a treat. So not all of those windows that you see there have been replaced. About, I don't know, 60% of them have been replaced. And on the other side, which I haven't taken any photos of, the majority of those windows have actually been repaired. The difference that this has made to the school is quite phenomenal. It's just having that darker tint to the windows, and having the windows actually in good condition just brings the whole building to life. It's quite incredible. It was just a very complex job, I have to say, and it relied heavily on a cooperative relationship with the builder. And when you get into some of these contracts at the education department or a commercial contract, a lot of it is, very contractual. It's about, who made this mistake, how much is this variation, all that sort of stuff. A big component of retrofit projects is cooperation, because you're having to figure things out as you go. And we were fortunate enough on this project to have quite a good builder. Well, he was a strange person, I'll have to say, and I don't think he'd mind me saying that, because we do have that kind of relationship. But he was absolutely perfect for this job. He had, he kind of had an instinctive understanding of how to make this project work. And he sort of had the interests of the school at heart. The other thing that's really important to note about this project is that it was all funded through the community. So it wasn't money that came off came out of the state purses. It was all given through donation. This one will keep moving. So I'll run through the remaining slides, but this project here is really interesting to me because we're basically renovating what's called a sustainability hub. And on top of that sustainability hub is a whole lot of gas furnaces, which are providing hot water for heating in the school. And that hot water is traveling in 4 different directions and then going into a fan room, which is heating up air, which is then heating the classroom. So it's kind of a crazy system. So we've been able to advocate that they need to get rid of that gas system and replace it rather than, just retrofit that existing plant room. And I suppose this is where I see that there are real opportunities for architects to work. We can play a role in making our buildings much more efficient if we kind of get involved in the way that building services works. And just finally, in terms of opportunities, I think there's a real opportunity with the mandatory climate reporting that's part of the legislation that the federal government has enacted, that architects could look at, schools and other facilities that have a number of buildings associated with them as to how we can actually make those buildings much more efficient, and that efficiency can become part of the organisations like a school or a childcare centre or whatever, how those efficiencies can feed into their climate reporting, their mandatory climate reporting. So that I'm not fully across that legislation, but it feels to me like if organisations have to make a concerted effort to reduce their emissions and they have multiple buildings as part of their facilities, architects, if they combine with services engineers and environmental engineers, they will go a long way to helping that organisation. So that's probably it, because I think I'm over time. Is that right?
Only a bit, but that's great. Well, I'm listening to.
So I'll leave it at that. But yeah, it's an area that I'm really fascinated in, and think there's potential for growth.
Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll leave questions to the end when we can combine them with Felicia's presentation. So speaking of which, let me just swap over. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I get to drive now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for having me. You know, I actually met Antony quite a while ago when we were starting up the Energy Efficiency and Electrification Alliance. So just to introduce myself, I'm Felicia Richardson. I took over Enviroflex insulation approximately 8 years ago. I'm not born of the insulation industry. I was out of management consulting. What I saw, though, was an industry that was fairly rogue in terms of its employment practices and its disciplines. And I spoke to the gentleman who I work for, and I sized the retrofit market for him. And I believe I was one of the first people to actually look at the retrofit market as a specialist market that could then drive decent employment practices and drive quality outcomes. So at the time, I pulled data from everywhere because it wasn't available. And we basically looked at, in Victoria, there was approximately 600,000 homes that were requiring insulation upgrades, either because they had none or, you know, basically they had very little. Now, prior to 2002, insulation wasn't mandatory in Australia. And obviously when it started, it was very, very low grade. So personally, you know, I went on, I'm the passionate retrofitter and have incorporated all of that into our work practices and our company practices. Now, through trying to drive this within the industry, I remember going to the Energy Efficiency Council conference one year and sitting at a table with a group of people from the government and them saying, well, how do we tackle this? You know, this is, you know, like there was a lot of, everyone's in fierce agreement that it should happen, but where is it at, kind of thing. And I said, well, but the government are the major homeowner in Australia. What shocked me was that two people from the government, from different departments, looked at me and said, well, what do you mean? What do you mean? And you are the single biggest homeowner in Australia through social housing and community housing and all of those different things, and of the poorest quality stock, typically, with people typically in residence who are compromised one way or another, either fiscally or in health or, you know, in any other way. So through all of these fantastic, you know, turning up and going to functions, you know, I came across the gorgeous Colin Long at a pub and where all the great ideas come from. So, and Colin is the Just Transitions, I'm going to say advocate, it's not, Just Transitions organiser for Victorian Trades Hall Council. And he and I caught up with our dear colleague Lynn Bennett. She and her husband Morris started up EcoMaster. Morris was one of the first energy assessors for homes in Victoria. In Australia. So, and together we got together with and we specialise in government programs basically. So Enviroflex in particular, we've been the only people that the Victorian government has trusted to retrofit social housing for many years now. We recognise the partners of the Electrification Alliance, like Lynn, who provide quality projects and have done retrofit programs in Bendigo, I'm going to muck it up, Lynn. Mildura. So really out there kind of initiatives that change the shape. So as I say, a couple of sherbets down, it sounded like a great idea. What we recognised was that there was no trusted provider in terms of rolling out energy efficiency programs since the collapse of the Australian Energy Foundation. I'm not sure whether you all are familiar with them, but they used to bring together a group of trusted contractors and then report back into the government, provide all the reporting that went with that. So what we decided to do was to try and fill that gap, and the Energy Efficiency and Electrification Alliance was born. It's a not-for-profit it's a consortium of people who or sorry, companies, and I should go back here, of companies who specialise in retrofit. So obviously Enviroflex, EcoMaster, Enviro Group, Co-Power, Earthworker, both brands of Earthworker, and Analytical Engines. So what we're looking to do individually as companies, we go around and we do singular retrofits. I do the mum and dad market. But what we're really looking to do is to roll out large scale programs through Homes Victoria, for example, the Sheppy programs in WA and things like that. Why are we important? Why are we relevant? As I said, single source of truth, a trusted person. We are a not-for-profit at heart. Many other programs are managed by large management companies who take an enormous proportion of the funds that are allocated to the programs in management fees and then come and engage us to actually deliver the programs. So what we wanted to do was to cut out that middleman, basically, to remove that layer so that we could maximise penetration into the market and retrofit as many homes as possible, maximising bang for the buck. As part of that, so yes, we do the retrofit, but we also provide education for the homeowner in terms of how they can best use their new energy efficient home. And I think that is really key. How do you run your appliances? It's really interesting to me, and in the insulation space, how many people say to me, well, how much money will I save if I put insulation in my home? What we find is often people don't. Because for the first time, they're actually able to afford to run their heating and cooling units. Because it's not just escaping out of the world. I love that Antony referenced insulation before, because obviously it's my bread and butter. But one of the big things is just the security of the thermal envelope, and there's never enough discussion on that. And in particular, when we talk about quality draft sealing, I mean, that is absolutely key. You can have a home that's insulated within an inch of its life, and the reality is that if it's got a half a door open kind of thing through ineffective draft sealing, it all goes for nothing. Years ago, I wrote a manifesto. It actually was sent around unions and things like that, with me saying that I don't understand for the life of me why the Victorian Energy Upgrades program is focused on like solar and heating and cooling units and things like that. And what it should be firstly touching on is the need for the thermal envelope. Once again, the government needs to drive the behaviour that it wants to see. We need healthy, comfortable homes for people who are then able to determine how they spend their dollar in terms of their energy efficiency. Yeah. Sorry, I know I'm going quick. So as I say, we created this to roll out government programs, not to do singular things. And we work with housing agencies. We also work with groups like Race for 2030 on national minimum rental standards. We're doing some work with RMIT and other groups like that as well, trying to prototype and show the efficiency. I'm sure most of you are aware of the Healthy Homes analysis that was done many years ago. So we did the insulation and the draft sealing on that. But for those of you who aren't aware of it, this was a social housing program. And what was found, it was quite unique in what they did. They didn't look at how much money was saved in terms of spending on energy. What they looked at was how much money was saved in terms of health of the home occupants. And on average, it was $865 per person, per home, per annum was saved. And I'm sure, we could extrapolate that far further by looking at the cost to GDP, the increase to GDP from people not being sick and continuing to be able to work. We could talk about mental health and how that all works. We could talk about comfort and how that relates into an inclusive home environment. And I think that that's really important. So we're all about providing comfortable and healthy homes for everyone, basically. We're a one-stop shop. So we take, as I said to you, we're a not-for-profit. We take out the need to shop around. We have trusted providers, and we basically manage the program. So, and I have the gorgeous Michael sitting beside me. And it's all right, you didn't need to wait, they don't you. And Michael is running the program at the moment for Yarra City Council, which was our first program. Now, I'm not going to go into super amounts of depth on it because it is a pilot and they've asked for a little bit of discretion. But I will ask Michael to just quickly give a brief on that, what that is. And then if you'd like, and you can hang with me for a minute and I don't run out of time, we can talk about just briefly about low-income housing and how low-income housing programs in Victoria have really taken over from the gap that the Victorian government hasn't been able to fill. So sorry.
Yeah, so I've been given the wonderful opportunity to run the program with Yarra City Council, which has been awesome. So we're currently delivering, or in the process of delivering 55 home retrofits within 6 months from go to woe. So we're certainly setting a pretty reasonable pace. But the program is split into two halves. There is a smaller subset of the program who have been given an increased budget that we are allowed to play with. So part of partnering with the funding organisation is actually being able to kind of dynamically allocate the budget. So we're not set 100% in stone going, your allocation is this, we can only spend up to that, and then afterwards, goodbye, have a good time. We're actually able to kind of shift the budget around a little bit between homes that require more effort, homes that require less effort, more work, less work, and all the rest of it. 3EA, we're delivering a range of energy efficiency upgrades that are basically, you could characterize into two groups. So we're doing thermal envelope work. So we do mostly draft, in that aspect, we're doing draft proofing, we're doing ceiling insulation. What I would like to expand into including next time would be also walls and underfloors, but we'll take our time, and it is a pilot program currently. So we're really looking to tighten up the thermal envelope of these homes to make it so that if you do run that heating, you do run that cooling, the clients can actually be comfortable for an extended period of time. It's not all gone immediately. The other part of what we're doing is really the electrification works or the electrification upgrades. So we're looking at things like solar, we're looking at things like reverse cycle air conditioning, and heat pump hot water as well. So the interplay between these two sets of upgrades certainly presents some challenges in terms of scheduling, in terms of budgets, what people can and can't have, what are the realities on the ground, some of the infrastructure that's available. These are all existing homes. Nobody needs to move out. We don't rip up any floors. We're not ripping off any walls. We're not ripping off any ceilings. Everybody stays in the entire time. We're in and done in a home practically in 3 days, really at an absolute maximum, but generally less. That's not to say that we're not getting good work done. We're very intensive for basically 2 days of on-site work, plus an initial assessment to understand what's going on in the home, how the client's using the home, and then what it is we can do to help them use that home and keep those bills low. Look, it's great fun at the moment. It's impacting real change. We're getting really good results. I'm really happy with it so far.
Very exciting.
Yeah.
So one of the things, and it is really interesting, sorry, I did just touch on, in the absence of there being large-scale social housing programs running at the moment, the local councils have picked up the initiative, and they've pulled together, a lot of them have pulled together low-income housing retrofit programs. What we're seeing, though, is with the current cost of living crisis, that if you don't have it, you don't have it. So I could talk to you about a lot of programs who've been offering, for example, $800 contribution towards insulation. When you've got to come up with $2,000 odd on top of that, if you don't have it, you don't have it. One of the things that's unique about Yarra is that they've actually pulled together a substantial contribution. And for Michael spoke about the different contexts, but there's one subset where it's up to $3,000 per home.
Yep.
And then there's
that smaller groups up to $10,000 a home.
And even then we're still finding challenges. And some of the challenges exist around the fact if you're in low income housing, often you have been low income for a prolonged period of time. So what we're seeing is quite unique challenges in terms of just the infrastructure to the home, many homes requiring rewiring and things like that. So what's been really interesting for us has also been working with other community organisations like the Brotherhood of St Lawrence, aged care programs, to try and draw additional funding to contribute to making people's homes safe and healthy. So
yeah, safe is a particularly surprising one. It's not generally something that we would think about in terms of just going into a home that's already occupied and has been for the last 30, 40, 50 years. But there are some really wildly unsafe understandings and practices about what's going on in people's homes. The amount of gas heaters that have doonas draped over the top of them, that have sofas pushed up against them. Some gentleman has his ceiling falling down. Don't worry, there's a bucket on the window ledge to catch the water that's coming in. There are some, low income people have not been low income for 5 minutes. It's been a little bit of time. And some people certainly require more care and effort than others. And some people are, absolutely going over those limits. But like I said, we've been quite fortunate to be able to kind of dynamically apply that budget as well. So some people are getting more than 10 grand spent on their home because it's just required. For some people, it's just to make it safe, let alone kind of starting to improve the thermal envelope. But, when you plug in a heater and cause a house fire, it's time for a rewire. Yep. It's just important. These things are necessary. Yep.
It's funny though. I mean, like being a bit daft, right? So I kind of thought that when we all had our smart meters put in, that a lot of these issues were dealt with. And, and clearly I was wrong, right? Clearly I was absolutely wrong. So, but it's certainly, it's been quite unique in its challenges.
Yep.
Now, many of you would have seen that the Victorian government, the Victorian Energy Upgrades program has looked to include insulation. And the announcement was made by the Premier a few weeks ago, talking about a rebate for insulation of about $1,500 a home. I am and I've given this feedback directly to the people who are managing the strategic direction of the BEU program. I am very worried about what this means for continuing retrofits into low-income housing in particular. One of the reasons being $1,500 is a lot of money when you don't have it. And if you look at the statistics the Premier came out with, for example, putting insulation in can save you up to $400 per annum. Well, if I'm low income and I'm looking at a $1,500 rebate in 8 months' time, I'm going to sit there and think, well, I can heat my house for maybe $150 over winter. So I have concerns about it slowing down the rollouts and things like that. Hopefully, though, shortly the tenders for the Homes Victoria retrofit, which is a $50 million program, will be at 157.
Yep.
So I've got my detail man here.
Yep.
157 million will be announced. Sorry, 5,000 homes.
That's right.
5,000 homes. So, and what we've also seen, so in that program, the federal government agreed to co-fund with the state governments. The state governments had to match it. Not shockingly, the Victorian government was a little bit lacking in funds. So compared to other states of a similar size, we didn't fare quite as well. What's been exciting though is that there's been a further announcement from the federal government that doesn't require it to be matched by the states. So we look forward to a continued rollout of retrofit firstly for some of the most vulnerable people. And I get really sick of people who sit in offices talking about the most vulnerable people. It's my pet peeve. But for the most vulnerable people and creating healthy and comfortable homes that will benefit Australia as a nation going forward, and certainly will facilitate opportunities for children growing up in those homes that would potentially otherwise be compromised through no fault of their own.
Felicia, we're under pressure time-wise.
I'm good. So I think that I've spoken to this. We've got lots of people who we talk to. We rock up to the opening of an envelope. So if anyone wants us to come along and have a chat to a group, or you think there's someone who you should connect us to, please reach out to these fantastic people. So Colin, just here, and Lynn, and obviously lovely Michael and myself. And, we'd love to hear from you because this is something that we are very, very passionate about. And I'm done.
All right, fantastic. Thank you very much. We might launch right into questions. We've got a little bit of an update in what's happening around the industry, but that's quite quick. So we'll do that in a few minutes just before 5 o'clock, and we can continue later if people want to hang around. Enzo, I might ask for your help in getting questions off the chat because
I'll send a message in the chat.
yeah, that'll be great. Do people around the room have questions yet? Down here?
Thanks very much for the presentation. Presentations. Just on the last one, my name's Sanduka and I'm a researcher here, and I've got a project with the Brotherhood of St Lawrence where we're looking at electrification for low-income households. But the thing we're particularly interested in is whether you could scale up electrification at the area level. So I have a question about economies of scale, but whether you could do that under the regulatory process, because we're trying to decommission gas in line with the roadmap, whether we could, it could be shown to be cheaper to electrify households than to actually upgrade a new gas pipeline in a particular area. And the funds for doing that can actually be directed into electrification. My question is, like, it's an absolute tragedy, the state of the housing stock, particularly for low-income housing. And I think low-income private rentals are particularly hard done by because there are these retrofit programs for social housing. But my question is whether you have any ideas about how we could actually get economies of scale in this, and how much of a difference that would make to bringing down both the costs, but also getting a kind of social license and collective buy-in from households who are busy and have many other things to think about, how you could actually get people more motivated and have organisations working together to electrify at the local area, the community scale.
I think it might be a Colin question, but I am going to say you'd just be amazed how many people we're going in and we're putting in new RCACs and things like that, and they say, "Oh no, but just leave my gas there, leave it there." It's a really interesting thing. Is it a you thing or a Colin thing? Answer.
Look, I guess I'm happy to give it to Colin.
Well, it is a topic of some interest to me. I think precinct level electrification has got a lot of. We've talked about that here at the commercial scale as well. Makes a lot of sense commercial, but I think it does for suburbs of housing as well. And there's some organisations that are doing this at a street by street level. I think that the demonstration benefit of that, where neighbours say, "Oh, you've done that,"
Yeah,
they can go and look at what a heat pump is and get told how they work, and because there's still a lot of ignorance about how heat pumps work and how to use them effectively. So I think that is a big benefit of doing it at street level or a precinct level. For us as installers, it's so much easier if you can move to the next house instead of having to drive across the city to the next job. That makes a big difference, actually. So those sorts of things are a real benefit. And I think the figures are there to show you can electrify houses much. The benefit of electrifying houses greatly outweighs upgrading the existing gas network. One thing of interest, one of our organisations, I don't think it's formally a member of 3A, but it's in the earthwork and network, is Cooperative Power. I'm on the board. It's a cooperative electricity retailer, and we've just, for a long time, we didn't sell gas because we didn't have anything to do with fossil fuels, but a lot of households have electricity and gas with the one retailer. So we decided to do it, but we promised our people who signed up to buy gas off us, that we would put the profits from that into electrification of households. So we've been giving money to one of 3A's constituent organisations to help. They go around draft proof and stuff and help get off gas, and that's been actually quite popular. People signing up because they want to they've got gas, but they want off it.
Yeah.
It's really good.
And it's a staged process.
Yeah.
It's hard to do it all at once.
Yeah.
I'll just add that dealing with, particularly with older low income people, you know, such as you might do through Brotherhood of St. Lawrence and stuff like that, there is definitely real attachment to their gas appliances. And a lot of them are really reluctant to have it either even talk about decommissioning said gas appliances. So look, certainly I would say that it's definitely worthwhile, you know, going for electrification rather than upgrading the gas system, because it already supplies them and, you know, they're not going to expand their gas usage anytime soon. But in terms of, you know, starting to kind of wind that down, there's certainly a level of buy-in that you need to get, and it's not necessarily forthcoming. You know, like a lot of people, you know, might sit here and be like, well, clearly that's obvious. But a lot of people quite attached to their appliances and they're not keen to let them go.
And obviously it impacts the amount of draft sealing we can do,
Yes.
because you can't seal a house with gas in it.
Comment or a question. On the scaling is that there's probably two.
John, hit the button. Yeah.
In looking to scale apart from the, you know, these are the regulatory guys, if you start electrifying homes that are in an area, will they have enough capacity in the network to actually cope? Because we've had some projects where we've had to turn off the gas and guess what, we didn't have enough power. And I'm wondering whether, and I know that most of the power companies sell gas, getting money from the electric retailers or distributors to help fund the transition away from gas, because they sell more power. So this is a bit of a double-edged sword. You could be really successful and then you go, well, guess what, we don't have enough juice in the precinct or the network. And the people who can fix that are the guys who sell the power. So maybe there's an angle there that says they help fund the decasification and beef up their network.
So going back to my manifesto, you know, one of the things was, so we're replacing RCACs. We're giving funding to do that, but we're not securing a thermal envelope. So we're enabling the rest of the environment to be heated more effectively, for example. You know, and that's a big thing. And you know, I hear you. I bought a factory and there's not enough power. I can't get the power.
Reduce your envelopes down and halve the cost for your heating and cooling. You know, it's the demand things helps solve that.
Yeah.
You got to, you know, how many houses we have to do? 600,000.
Wow.
How many are you doing?
One of the aspects of the Yarra project is a concept called a climate safe room, which is something that ECOMAS developed back in 2011 with Mildura Council. So we were.
So Lynn, you're back.
Sorry, one of the projects that we worked on was the Mildura Council. They were very early adopters. The diurnal range, temperature range in Mildura is 52 degrees Celsius. So freezing cold in the morning, stinking hot in the afternoon. You've got no chance if you're living low income. and you can't heat and cool. We had a very limited budget that we could work on with that cohort. I think there's 28 homes that we worked on in 3 weeks. It was an insanely ferocious project, but we had a brilliant team with us. Michael was part of that team, and everyone was really dedicated to doing a really good job for all the customers that we had. And there was one particular lady who had, she already had air conditioning on her in her home, given to her by her adult children. And when I went in to kind of do the initial briefing and understand the assessment requirements for this client, she said, I asked her if she used the air conditioning, and she said, oh no, we couldn't afford to run it. It's too expensive. And I was like, wow, I could see that her husband was very unwell. And I was like, wow, okay. And, their main room was facing west, so it got the afternoon sun, and we're looking, okay, so we can get some shading on the outside, we can do this stuff. And then we came up with this idea of basically cocooning one room because we had such limited budget. And we went, what if we actually just retrofitted one room insanely well where the air conditioning was already existing, and see if we can actually just basically then cool this one room. So we did this work, and I could see that the lady was quite mistrusting of what I was saying and didn't really believe, but it was like, oh, well, you just do your thing, dear, and we'll just, we'll get on with our lives. Anyway, so we did this work. I did a great job, put the bow on, beautiful. A couple of months later, I was actually back in Mildura, and I saw this lady in the supermarket, and she yelled out to me across Coles in Mildura, so which got the attention of everyone in the store. And she came running up to me and she was crying. And I thought, oh God, her husband's died. This is going to be awful. Oh, I'm really bad with this stuff, Anyway, so she grabbed my hands and she said, thank you, you have changed my life. And so then I started crying, and I'm like, oh, So anyway, so the two of us are howling over each other over tomatoes in Coles. And she said, I was too embarrassed to tell you at the time, but she said, on the really, really hot days, my husband and I would take turns of getting in and out of the bath. They didn't have a shower, so they had to get physically into a bath. And she said, I was always terrified because her husband was a very big bloke. And she said, I was terrified that once we cut twice, the floor would be wet, one of us would slip and fall, and that would be a very bad outcome for the pair of us. And she said, we don't need to do that anymore. She said, we do what you told us. We put the air conditioning on for 10 minutes in the morning in our little room. We seal it off like you told us. We take a thermos of coffee, we take our sandwiches in there, and we sit in there all day. They're a retired couple, so they can do that. They're quite dominant. And they watch TV, they do their knitting, in summer in Mildura. And so basically they've created this little cocoon, and she said it's just 10 minutes in the morning, the room is cool all day, we put it on again in the afternoon just for another 10 minutes. She said it has changed our life. And I was like, this is the work that we need to be doing. This actually changed lives, and this is what drives us to actually continue the work that we do. So yeah, it's a beautiful story, it's for me, it was a life changer, that conversation in Coles over the tomatoes.
That's a great story. Look, I might just interject there for a moment, just to quickly cover what's happening in Retrofit, and then we'll go back to the questions, because there'll be lots of people around here, virtual and here, who need to leave. Sadly, the class action on the housing towers was not successful. So that's the class action where was led by the evicted tenants and saying their rights had been breached, and that the government owed the duty of care to look into the options of keeping them in place while they did look at other options around refurbishing those buildings instead of knocking them all down and evicting everybody. So currently the lawyers haven't given up, but they're looking at other avenues of appeal. But I think it's probably an uphill battle from here. But on the other side of things, it's, we're at the start of 44 towers. So the earlier we can have these conversations and the earlier we can have these robust debates, hopefully we'll get to an outcome that is more reasonable for some of the other ones. The Retrofit Lab's putting together an exhibition in the Dulux Gallery downstairs here.
Including a climate safe room.
Yeah. Sarah, did you want to say anything to the, or Enzo, both of you?
Yeah, we're really excited about that concept. Please come to the opening party on the 25th of July. It's going to be part of Open House Melbourne. But yeah, anyway, you'll through the Retrofit Lab mailing list, you'll be getting more information about this. The opening party, this forum will be held down in the gallery during the exhibition. Lots of fun things going on over that time.
Right. And then the Energy Efficiency Council National Conference is on the 27th of May, which is highly relevant to retrofit, obviously. All right, we might go back into questions. Don't feel embarrassed about leaving if you've got things to get home to at 5 o'clock, because that's when we're scheduled to finish, online or here. And so do we have online questions that we might?
Yeah, we've got some questions online. Claire Parry says, studies have looked at broad scale co-investment via social and carbon offsets for housing upgrades for social and community housing. Have you investigated getting involved in this? Some providers are deep into getting movements.
Yeah, so we certainly looked into, I've spent a lot of time looking into the economics behind this. And it's certainly, look, it's something that we already engage with anyway, right? So the two major programs that we engage with that provide these kinds of carbon offsets are the small technology certificates from the federal government and VEX generated by Victorian Energy Upgrade Program. We already claim these insofar as we can while we're pursuing our regular activities. It's additional layers of paperwork. We pursue it because it reduces the bite into the budget that we've been allowed by our program to spend on these homes. It by no means covers really the whole of anything, is the unfortunate truth. For instance, if you take if you take a solar installation, at the moment, if you claim all the STCs, you're available to do so, and you take up the Solar Victoria interest-free loan, you will install a solar system of roughly about 4 kilowatts, depending on installation conditions, all the rest of it, for about $3,000 left over, which has to come out of somebody's pocket. So be it ours, councils, the homeowners, whoever it is, and that's just an example. If you take installing reverse cycle aircon, which is the most efficient form of heating and cooling, provided you also decommission an existing gas appliance, you will get more VEX, but you'll still be left something like between $1,200 and $1,600 out of pocket, which again has to come from somebody's pocket. So look, it's certainly very helpful to build into program design, and it's something that we will continue to claim and continue to pursue. But at the moment, it's the carbon credits are not there that will allow us to just continually roll, these types of programs. It's just the economics just don't support it currently.
One of the concerns that I have is where we've seen for different program rollouts, in particular in the ACT, which has been quite comprehensive. It has increased while there has been rebates and things available and low cost loans and things like that available, and notably they're available around Australia. But there's also been an increase in cost that has corresponded with it, and that's always something to think about too. So it drives the market. So potentially.
So where does that increase cost come from? Is that just?
Well, there's a few things. So if I look from an insulation perspective, to be an installer in a program, you actually have to be certified with the Energy Efficiency Council, and so there's a cost associated with training people, with registering them. And then obviously with all of the reporting and workflow management that is required over that. So many people would say that is simply it. But once you close a market, and please don't get me wrong, the EEC adopted the Enviroflex model pretty much into the training. So I am very, very pro it. But the reality is, once you lock down a market to a few providers, it drives its own market. So just to be aware of that. It was interesting. I expect there to be an enormous amount more insulation installers certified once the government programs come out. But once again, that'll be because you're not competing with mums and dads. you know, who can go down and hire Robert Bob and their ute at a very cheap rate. Insulation in particular is a very low income to, a low barrier to entry. Yeah. Driver, you know, literally all I need is a ute. I can go and hire a guy down. I could actually go outside and see, get a student and go, hey, you want to come, and I'll throw you a couple $100 and throw them up in a roof potentially. So certifications and things like that, it does increase the cost considerably.
So just a question, just related to the levels of retrofit. I run a building company that focuses on retrofitting passive house standard.
Yep.
And you know, with the risk of leaky building syndrome in New Zealand, under crisis in Canada, like is there any mechanical ventilation or education around opening windows after you've done just the $1,000 spec retrofits like draft proofing and insulation?
Yeah, look, absolutely. So that's certainly part of the education part of what we do. So having been in a home, and to begin with, at the point where you start the assessment. So the assessment's a very interactive process that you spend a fair bit of time talking to the client about how they use their home to begin with, right? And what they generally get up to in the day. At the point where the installations are happening or when they're complete, so pretty much throughout the day, there's a very interactive process with the occupant, the client, whatever you'd like to call them, about what this means for them and the behaviours that they need to adopt in regards to what's happening to their home. Not that necessarily that they need to adopt, but should adopt. Right?
What behaviours?
So for instance, if you take an extremely leaky, in terms of air filtration, if you take an extremely leaky building and you do a really great job of sealing it, you may find as an occupant that you run out of air at some point, and it's going to make you sleepy. And at that point, you need to actively ventilate the home.
Yeah.
You know, that's the way to get around that. You know, it's not often that homes can be retrofitted to that particular level, as I'm sure you're aware, passive houses can be really challenging to achieve in terms of an air exchange rate.
Yeah. Because I mean, we get a lot of leads at the minute. We're saying no to the majority of them because if they don't have budget to go sort of to that mechanical ventilation, airtightness level.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's kind of like, do we try and make this other offering where it's deliberately leaky still to some degree and still open up the door to other potential clients? Or, you know, do we just try and save our own liability as a builder and say we're just going to do passive house?
It's a big thing at the moment. Like I hear this a lot, like people who, a lot of people who train in passive house and say, but I think that there's a really good thing that sits just beneath it. There's a really good point that sits just
So how do you deal with that with your clients?
Getting expertise is actually quite difficult. So you do need a passive house designer involved. But the sort of mechanical ventilation is, you know, it's working in the background to get fresh air in on a constant basis. If that's designed properly, you should have constant fresh air at all times in a passive house. So in the house that we showed you in West Melbourne, that was the case. And the one we did in Northcote is similarly the case. So it has to be integral into the overall design. You definitely can't have an airtight house and just live in it. You do need constant fresh air.
Yeah,
So it does
want
need
to
to
be careful where you get
careful.
to air change. So I think it's below 5.
Well,
You really need.
You can't seal a building and just let it set and forget. You just cannot.
But there are grades of it. So you think you're doing a wonderful job. You realise.
But people need education on this too.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of rental tenants don't realise that if they're drying their clothes inside or they've got all their windows and doors shut all the time, particularly when our houses are better sealed, that there's a lot of moisture build up and then you get these mold problems. So, you know, trying to educate people about the need to, unless you've got heat recovery ventilation, that you need to open doors and windows and get cross ventilation and how that works. And I think that's part of the responsibility as an architect to be educating your clients as you're going along. But
The bigger
I've
problem.
also got on fairy floss, where people are talking about mold and had a little bit of a, Brad just saying, it's not always the landlord's fault. There's all of these other things, and just know that you need to open the window in your bedroom. And,
Is there almost a disclaimer that kind of giving to the clients to say, if you're not doing this, there's going to be issues and we're not at risk anymore?
We're not that airtight.
The short
Sorry.
answer is that to get homes to that level of airtightness is quite hard.
So
And
how are you
it's a lot
doing lower door testing?
No, so we do sometimes.
So how do you know how airtight?
We do sometimes, but the bigger problem for us with draft proofing is if they've still got gas heaters, so we can't seal them very well. Just can't do it, you can't do it, so. You can't just see the ceiling as the draft ceiling as you've got to figure the house, especially if you're retrofitting, not designing new, as an integral whole. And you want to get rid of the gas heaters first and foremost, if you can, but then that's going to cost money.
The thing is that when we're talking draft proofing with the clients, we're talking about retaining treated air more, right? I'm not talking to a client going, yeah, look, you at the moment, your home's 30 air changes an hour and I'm going to get it down to 4. Like, that's not a conversation, right? The conversation is that at the moment, your home is very leaky and it's always very cold, and or potentially you run the heating all of the time, or you cannot afford to run it at all and you're just very cold. There's a client who sits in her chair with the doona over her. That's her existence, right? So that conversation is not, I'm going to get you down to 4 air changes an hour and then we're going to do heat recovery ventilators. The answer is that we're going to do our best with the building envelope that you've got, bearing in mind I'm not going to rip up the walls, floors or doors or anything else, right? I'm going to treat what's already there that I can get to and that I can treat without prohibitive cost, right? Which, to be fair, is most of it. For instance, if it does start at 30 air changes an hour, I'm pretty confidently get it below 10. That's not actually very, like, in terms of structural changes, that's not very hard to do. It's doable, right? But I'm not sitting there going, hey, you need to sign this contract saying I'm going to get you below 10. I'm going to get you below 4, right? You're going to go, look, I'm given the budget we've got, this is the best, this is what we can do. This is what we're aiming for. At some point, if I do magically get you below 4, you need to open a window, right? Like, at some point, you're going to have to ventilate your home.
Yeah, I think the air changes per hour that's tested at 50 pascals, which is a wind capacity of 34 kilometres. So it's not a windy day outside, and you do get tired. It could be one air change with no wind, quite easily.
Yeah.
It's really interesting the amount of mold, going back to mold that we come across. So we do retrofit underfloor insulation, which is bloody hard yakka. And the amount of mold in the last few years that we've come across underfloor is amazing. Far more than what we see inside. Far more. So it's been quite extraordinary. And even though in this year, I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but we've actually had in many regional areas, like especially where my farm is, it's been the driest year that we've had in 26 years. So it's drought. Everyone's dams are dry, but mold is prevalent everywhere.
So could I just ask a question in there? So Antony, you work with environmental sustainable design consultants.
Well, when we're doing the passive house, we've worked on 2.
So I guess the question is there a point in the building industry where we get below maybe where you guys are? And there's the person with a couple of students, and are you, or he's doing
Rob
draft,
Bobbin, are you?
who's doing draft proofing, is actually making houses more dangerous? And do we have enough regulation, and do we need to be doing more on that?
Am I gonna, you asked me to upset everybody again?
So I think there is a risk that you could be making it too airtight, but in the current circumstance. So
Okay, all right, now I will cop this one. So what we see in draft proofing that is coming out of the VEU, so the mass market of draft proofing where people are claiming beaks, is people not typically doing it very well. And because it's being done substantially for free, You're getting the door knockers and all of that kind of thing, although that's been outlawed now, but you're getting the door knockers come around and say, I'm going to come in and I'm going to do these draft proofing things to your door. These guys get paid out of the BEU program. It falls off in 2 days' time because the people didn't pay for it.
Yeah.
They don't actually ring up and complain.
It's free. Oh, well.
It's free. Oh, well, it fell off. Oh, or the company's no longer there, or, so there's got to be a rush to quality. So going back to, there's got to be a rush back to quality providers, and there needs to be really tight training and holding companies accountable for the products that they're installing. Once again, it becomes a bit difficult when someone's not paying for it. They don't value what they don't pay for. So, is it better to have a co-contribution kind of thing where somebody feels invested? Hang on, I paid 20, even if I paid $20 for something that was $120 kind of thing. Hang on, it fell off. I'm not happy about that. I'm gonna chase them up and and we get rid of those bottom feeders.
I don't see danger in retrofitting homes so that they're so airtight that people will either pass out or that mold will become a significant issue. At the moment, draft proofing is an industry, even here in Victoria, which is on the leading edge of retrofit all of the time anyway, is just not that good. What is much more of a concern is causing carbon monoxide poisoning. That really should be the very first conversation around draft proofing, and it's certainly what we look at as the very first interaction with the client. So you're looking at all of the sources of gas heaters, unflued water furnaces, which are ancient and just burning a flame the entire time. It's certainly possible to cause a problem with that. That's certainly something to consider. But in terms of causing condensation or mold or running out of air, we're just not that good. The building envelopes are not that sturdy. It's just not a concern.
Imagine what you're doing is you're taking it from here and getting to a sort of midpoint, and that's making a big difference to people's lives.
Absolutely.
If you're going to sort of high performance buildings like passive house, then I think the things that you're talking about become much more prevalent. That's my take on what you're saying. Because if you're talking about passive house, really talking about a high performance building, and ventilation becomes a really critical part of that. Absolutely.
And of course, gas cooking itself causes more health problems in the long term than anything we do.
Yeah, so it's sort of talking about, I don't know, your question, I think we're talking about two slightly different things.
Yeah, I was just more shallow retrofits that have been done in other countries for the last.
Like, I think one of the real benefits of retrofit that you guys are doing is we've just got so much housing out there that is of poor quality. And if you can lift the standard, to some extent, you're making a big difference. It's much better than building a sort of trophy home, 7-star house, in my opinion, by lifting it from the ground up, in my opinion. That's where retrofitting, I think, has.
So I think the middle of the market is probably the dangerous place to be in.
I think if you have, I suppose it's probably more a risk, what you've described on my clientele, where they're sort of wanting a kind of high performance, and suddenly you seal up the building and there's mold growing and someone passes out. I hope that doesn't happen. I think it's something to be aware of. I think essentially there's passive solar design and then there's passive house. And there's a sort of space in between that you've got to be careful of, okay? That's really what you've got to do. When you get to passive house, you need people like Claire Parry and other people involved in the design of it. If you're doing passive solar, you basically need, in my opinion, good common sense design around, what is effective.
I have a question, Anthony. Chris Bunham with Atelier 10. And you've got some great projects there with some enlightened clients. How do we get more of those? I do think that end of the market is important because they do drive change across. It becomes mainstream at some point. I'm going through a house renovation very much like yourself. It's messy, complex and expensive to renovate an old California bungalow to passive house standards, and I don't feel like there's enough people doing it. Is it going to be carbon targets? Is it going to be
Are you green?
Yes, I've got to agree. Is it going to be perhaps certifications, or what's going to push a much larger number of clients to say, yes, we're going to go down that complex, tricky pathway to do it?
It's a really good question. I don't really have the answer. I think to some extent, does seem to be older Australians are interested in this, you know, sort of health and well-being. The connection between energy efficiency and health and well-being seem to be closely related. My experience is, you know, people who have sort of got money, I'll be honest, and you know, have the ability, the financial capacity to do the work on their houses are interested in this space. So I think that's part of the market, the growing market. So I think it's connecting it to health and well-being primarily. Just in the other space, the sort of you know, schools and commercial operations, I think, you know, energy costs are going up. So being able to reduce the energy costs is playing a role in that. And as I mentioned, the sort of mandatory reporting could potentially play a role in it as well. So in terms of residential, it's an interesting one because I think architecture sort of operates on look, you know, and the sort of stuff where you're doing environmental stuff is a lot about feel. It's about the vibe of the place, which is a little bit hard to communicate in imagery.
Yes.
So I guess
Carbon particularly, I mean, passive houses have been great at driving operational energy, and you can kind of experience that.
you can
Low
experience
carbon, it's hard to,
Yeah.
you know,
So I think all I can say is I think we need to tell better stories. I personally, in doing my own house, I sort of perhaps didn't reflect on that as well as I could have, but actually living it has been remarkably beneficial for me. I've actually understand it a lot better, even though I've been working in the field for a long time. I actually kind of understand the basics a lot better, and feeling the benefits has been really important to me to be able to explain it to other people. Having
Can I
a
ask
warm,
about-
comfortable house.
Can I just ask about the labour involved in retrofitting? I think that we think a lot about the kind of formal labour that comes in through the supply chain that we understand, but you're also talking about a whole lot of kind of invisible labour that goes on, like the searching to understand what's the best option, you know, the kind of labour you're doing in your homes around managing the waste, etc. Do you think we really have fully accounted for all the different types of labour involved in retrofitting?
Maybe if I answer that, I think retrofitting is a skill. I really do. I think it's sort of something that I guess I feel like I've acquired just through being in the industry for a long time. And the way we do documentation, the way that we have to think about projects is quite different to a traditional standalone building, right? You have to think on your feet constantly. And I think there is a lot of unseen work as you've described. I think any builder, I don't think they can really promise the project, to be really honest with you, because there is just this unseen work as you've described. So it tends to be, you kind of have to have a really good relationship with the client, and you have to have a good understanding of how things will evolve on site. So you're having to navigate as you work through the project.
And for clients, the uncertainty is a reason not to go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can do what we're doing because it's my own house, but when I'm doing a project for another client, like, you know, a bespoke client, you're just managing risks all the time, and you're having to set up documentation that kind of gives guidance to the builder without actually articulating what the outcome will be. And that's quite difficult to do. I don't know if you understand what I'm trying to say there, but it's having to set a strategy in place that they can navigate, and then you hope like hell they understand it.
Yeah.
I think it's a good question though, and I'd like to come back to the embodied carbon side of things as well, because there's a bigger picture, and the indoor environmental quality is huge. And that's what most people see and feel. But you know, your Chemist Warehouse example, not a great architectural outcome, but in terms of keeping those old buildings and not knocking them down to rebuild them in steel and glass and concrete, you know, the embodied carbon results probably not a bad.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure I entirely agree, because if you go to that building, I was going to put it up as a slide, you know, they've painted like 3 massive facades, bright yellow, you know, put in a whole lot of fluorescent lights. I guess my point is we can't call every project a retrofit project. That's my point. It's that we have to have some, I think retrofit is a word that is being used a lot, and it's very connected to sustainability. And I think we should have some real standards around what actually constitutes a good retrofit project, in my opinion.
Yeah, I hadn't quite appreciated the connection to sustainability as much as I probably should have, but
Because there's a lot of
So,
retrofit, sorry to interrupt, there's actually a lot of retrofit projects out there. You can go to a bar in Collingwood that's converted an old warehouse into a really swanky bar, or you can go to a, you know, a sauna somewhere that's converted an old office into a relaxation place. You could say, wow, that's an amazing project, but they don't bring sustainability to it. They might be reusing the building, but they're using those buildings for commercial gain, not actually improving the infrastructure of that building. So in my view, they don't constitute a retrofit project, in my opinion.
but I think that's the debate, I guess, because
Yeah, it's a debate.
because the other thing with the labour is, you know, what we should be doing is moving from a dumb economy where we just dig stuff out of the ground and build new stuff the whole time, knocking everything else down, to an economy where we're actually being smarter. We're paying consultants, the people around this room probably, you know, more money to spend more time thinking about what a better outcome is. Because, you know, when you start looking at the precedences, you can there's lots of, you save a lot of money and time in doing retrofit projects rather than knocking down and rebuilding in large commercial projects in a lot of instances, not in all instances. But you know, if we can get to that pace where we're conserving buildings and not trashing all of that invested carbon.
But it doesn't have to be perfect. And this is kind of the notion that, you know, we've sat around here, you know, in the early days and, you know, had people like from CBUS sitting there and saying, we're not going to retrofit buildings, you know, we'll just up and down, it'll just be too expensive. It doesn't have to be perfect. You know, there's a lot of low hanging fruit. We can make the building, we can make the stock considerably better, you know, with not super amounts. And, you know, and when we talk about the whole embodied carbon and things like that, you know, the waste to landfill, I'm going to knock down a building. Well, where's that going? It's all going to landfill. You know,
Yeah.
there's got to be a balance on the cost.
Exactly, at this point though, I think there is a lot, it's not just the labour, it's also the knowledge and that, the labour of learning that anyone goes through, like from, you know, your clients have got you there to teach them, but that next level up that aren't eligible for those programs. You have to be really dedicated, and those of us that have done it, even working in the sector, like it's not easy to get the right information, figure out how to make the decisions and so forth. And that's where, you know, I have this kind of dream of the community architect model where you have someone like, you know, people have talked about it like a general practice, where you can walk into a, you know, a local GP surgery, but it's for home. And so you can very quickly get that advice. So all of that Dr. Google stuff that you've done, you have all of that in your head, and then you go and have 15 minutes with your GP who actually sorts you out with the information and the prescriptions that you need. So yeah, I think that kind of, there's a gap, or there's an opportunity there for, you know, a local authority or some kind of
energy service company.
Yeah, to really just actually help people walk through that really complicated maze.
The Dutch have a system that does this. The organisation is, my Dutch is terrible, so I'll just sound like an idiot if I say the words, but it's something like De Zandboliget or something, and they run retrofit advice services and recommendations and public events and so for about 115 municipalities in the Netherlands are providing exactly this sort of service. It's kind of what we've been trying to build with 3, the energy efficiency electrification line, something that is trustworthy, that puts the interests of the customers at the heart. At the moment, we're doing it for unavoidably probably for large scale projects because it makes the coordination cost effective, but it'd be nice to be able to provide something like that for individual households as well.
Well, the State Electricity Commission,
they're working on something.
Has their tool, their boom tool, but it doesn't do what you're suggesting. It's kind of a one-stop shop, online one-stop shop that connects you to installers. But you're talking about something that's more local, more bespoke, tailored to what people's needs are. But it's kind of within their remit potentially to be exploring that kind of option.
They are, no.
But it is the, like, when you go, like, if you haven't been through this process yourself, you go online and how do you even know which, the online tools and there, it's mind-boggling. So if you just had a builder or an architect or even an architecture student who could, you know, the same way that legal clinics, law schools run legal clinics, if that might be something that we could look at.
I think retrofitting as a trade would be a really good idea. I did point to my son, he's kind of doing bits and pieces all over the place. He has no specific skills. He's just doing things around the place. And then I've met retired social workers who do similar things. It's kind of, it would be good if that sort of body of knowledge was actually recognised as a kind of skill in the community, in my opinion.
But there's also something that your point about a well-maintained building is easier to retrofit. I think that's the other thing, is recognising, which again is hidden labour in the built environment, is the labour and the effort that goes into maintaining things every year, and you have to be onto it. And you have to have the means, and you have to have, you know, space in your busy life to actually repair the guttering and repair the broken window.
We should also have a system. It's been talked about a lot of, you know, when you this will deal with the partly deal with the issue you've talked about, where whenever a house is sold, you know, you have to have a report on its energy consumption.
The ACT's got that.
We should
Had that long time.
And even the, you know, the various star rating systems which don't actually report on the actual function of the building as it's in use, but only some sort of technical presumption about its use. So I think that would be very useful if that was a compulsory system where every house had to sell some sort of report on it.
All right, we're long over time, half an hour. I think that's because there's so much to talk about. It's all been very good discussion. Which points us maybe doing more on residential retrofit, particularly passive house and indoor environmental quality and other retrofit forum sessions, which we will take on board. Enzo will also have a look at the chat and try to pick up any questions in there that we may have missed. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming along, both in person and online. And we'll see you actually next week. It was a plug here.
Next week.
So next month, I should say. Get ahead of myself. We're actually looking at digital. Enzo, did you want to say anything on that, given you're down to be a speaker? I think.
You have to find out next month. But properly, but no, it's on the campus, this University of Melbourne campus, Parkville campus, and how we use digital information, where and the report kind of covers how decisions are made on campus, what information we need on campus to make decisions around retrofitting rather than demolition and rebuild. And there's some insights that we share from that. And then we'll also have another speaker, possibly. We'll also have another speaker who's to be confirmed.
Yeah, which I'm looking forward to, because it comes to that whole precinct retrofit, because retrofit isn't just about the building, it's about streets and environment and everything else as well. So all right, 27th of May, put it in your diary. Thanks very much.